Hello, and welcome to episode number 151 of the Board Game Barrage podcast, a podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. I am Kellen the Red Tank, joined by my favorite friends, Neelan and Mark.
Hello, favorite friend.
Hello, friend.
This is the start of an alliance. Wait, what?
You're not a favorite
I'd already
friend.
started my sentence, Neelan. You can't do that.
Wait, your sentence was going to be you're in alliance with Neelan?
No, the three of us.
Oh, gotcha.
There's one
you said
person
it was
not
be the start
here.
of that alliance?
Well, I've just felt things sort of slip away, and I'm thinking of grand romantic gestures to try to sort of swing us back.
I appreciate that.
To where we started. Today on the Board Game Barrage podcast, we are going to be talking about something that you should pay attention to in the world of board games. How's that for clickbait, kids? Something. Who knows what something is? It could be X. It could be Y. It could be Z. That's how I pitch this to them, where they have to come up with the X, the Y, and the Z, so I don't have to come up with topics. But before we do that, we're going to talk about the games that we have played. Neelan is going to give us some updates on recent plays of Targi and New York Zoo. I'm going to be taking us through a little Japanese card game called Throne and Grail. And Mark will hit us up with the latest hotness like he does, Red Cathedral.
I'm blazing over here. That's my
Wait, what are you blazing?
Your new slogan.
No, because I'm always doing the hot games. So whenever I play a hot game, I say, I'm blazing over here.
I thought it was a drug reference to try to appeal younger. All the young ones like me, Mark. Stop it. Neelan, let's talk about New York Zoo.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be a relatively quick update, and I'm very curious to oh god, I'm very curious to hear your guys' thoughts as well. Because last time we spoke about this, I had played just the preview game of this, a full game of this, but on Tabletop Simulator as part of Capstone's Camp Capstone event. I now have the physical copy of the game, and I've played it through several times since. My update on New York Zoo is I still think it is extremely good. I think it is so good at the weight that it is targeting, which is very much in the vein of something like a Bärenpark, but maybe like a little step up from that. In some ways, to me, it becomes the Bärenpark replacement for me.
Oh, is it killing it?
You know what? Why not? Let's do it. Let's do both. I think it's a Bärenpark killer.
Death at Christmas.
The caveat to this here is I've not played the Bärenpark expansion, which I think people feel quite strongly about as a upgrade in complexity to Bärenpark. But I do think that New York Zoo as a simple polyomino laying game that is in the vicinity of something like a Patchwork or a Bärenpark in weight feels like a really good contender for that zone. If you're comparing it to other Uwe polyomino games, the realm of like Indian Summer, I still feel like this is the one at that weight that I want to play. Now, you two have since played New York Zoo yourselves.
Yes.
What do you think?
The best thing about New York Zoo is the box cover.
There you go.
The second best thing about New York Zoo is the meeples.
That is true.
And scene.
And
no, New York Zoo is a game.
Mm-hmm.
It is perhaps a little overhyped right now. And that may be where some of my sort of pushback to it is coming from. So this game is relatively expensive compared to Patchwork or Nova Luna that you're sort of comparing it to in the $30, $35, $40 MSRP range. It has these beautiful animeeples in a bunch of different shapes. You got your flamingo softs, you got your penguins, you've got your kangaroos, you've got your other kangaroos, the little kangaroos, the meerkats.
Little
you've got
kangaroos?
Excuse
Wow.
me? But the challenge for me is that the game is kind of annoying to play with. Like, the sand is gritty in my hands. For one thing, it's annoying to set up. It's really annoying to set up. The pieces, there are 4 different types of tiles, and the pieces are labeled as such. There is the light green enclosure spaces, the lightest green enclosure spaces, the darker green enclosure spaces, and the darkest green enclosure spaces.
That's clear.
That's literally, I've got the rule book out so that you can't.
I can visualize all of the colors perfectly in my head there.
You absolutely cannot. And then you have to set them out in like this weird order. Okay, I just don't. It's a good game. I'm surprised that it's not a better game. I'm happy it's a little bit interactive. I think it has the right type of interaction where it's sort of this shared selector, and you have to choose between 0 and 4 spaces depending on your player count. And I like how that injects that interaction. I just think Patchwork is better, Nova Luna is better, and they're cheaper and they're easier to set up. And this has all the little animals, and you're trying to like stack 17 flamingos on one darkest green enclosure tile, and then they all fall over, and you're like, why am I doing this again? Oh, it's because of the pretty box cover.
I don't think I had any of the issues you're describing in terms of like fiddliness. Like, I think the things that you're talking about, like with like collecting the meeples together and throwing them away and keeping one, like you do that occasionally. I never found it that tedious, to be perfectly honest. And also any excuse to like pick up all the meeples and like you want to be interacting with the pieces when they're like that. But anyway, that's a minor point. But I don't disagree with you at all that it's not as good as Patchwork and Nova Luna. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, Patchwork is still, I think, for me at least, the benchmark in simple polyomino games. And Nova Luna feels like so refreshing because it takes what I think is one of the best mechanics from Patchwork and does something completely new with it. But in a lot of ways, that's kind of what I found so refreshing about New York Zoo. Like, on the surface, the idea that Uwe is like, oh, I'm going to take one of my most overused mechanics, breeding, and mix it with one of my most overused mechanics, polyominoes, and just melt them together. For that to work at all, it impressed me, certainly.
My biggest concern, I've only played this once, so maybe you can tell me whether or not this bears out upon repeated plays, was that...
No, that's Bärenpark.
Nice, that's good. Was that in the game that I played, I found that the tiles that you could pick up along the rondelle, toward the end of the game, you sort of lucked into being able to place those. So what I mean to say is that in our game, a person went from being in last place to taking the lead and eventually winning because late in the game he was able to fit a piece that was on the board onto his tableau just because he had like a shape that happened to be accommodating to it. And I was in the lead, and this might be sour grapes as to why I have this negative feeling about it, but I was in the lead early on and for much of the game being very efficient in my placement, and then towards the end I had like a perfect box left to fill, but all the leftover tiles were like much bigger, I found, than I could fit. And so I was sort of locked out of doing that, and I had to just do the breeding. And it felt like somebody could luck into placing a big spot late if they had left a large part of the park open, if that makes sense.
I think I understand what you're saying, and I honestly, I think my on-the-surface reaction to that a little bit is, I don't think that would happen super often, that you just had exactly the right large shape left and you found the corresponding piece to do it. But also to that point, like, this partly came up in the preview game I was playing of it, where I had a very specific shape left on my board, and it was apparent to the other players. They're like, oh, hey, if Neelan gets this piece, he wins. So there became this sort of like conjoined effort of everyone to like make sure that we were skipping over that piece every single time. Now, obviously, you'd have to be paying attention to everyone's boards in that case. Right. I do think it being a race game makes that a little bit easier, because the only thing you really have to pay attention to is how much empty space every other player has. And I also think that, if I may, Mark, leaving yourself a small enough space that only a handful of pieces could fill does feel like maybe something that you sort of built yourself into, like a corner you painted yourself into.
So, I mean, I guess, would you agree that a good strategy in the game, and maybe we're getting a little too deep in the woods for New York Zoo, but are you finding like an ideal strategy to be like causing a lot of breeding to get the bonus tiles early on, and then leaving yourself a big enough space late to grab one of the big tiles at the end? The reason I ask is because it felt like at the end, it wasn't just me, but the other players in the game were basically unable to take most of the tiles that were left over on the rondelle, and were just sort of settling for whatever they could find, or trying to do breeding to get those small 1x1 spaces.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And I don't think I played it enough at high player counts to necessarily know that super well. Right. But what I have tended to try to do in my games that has worked well for me is leave myself gaps that there are multiple pieces and one accessory that I can fill with, right? So that whatever happens, I just have to do one more breeding and one more enclosure, and then I can complete. And leaving yourself as much variety in your empty space in order to fulfill that multiple ways seems to have worked well for me. But yeah, I don't know, to be perfectly honest.
And it's so light and rules light and easy to play.
Exactly.
That I definitely wouldn't mind giving it a couple more spins and seeing how things go.
That sounds like a player scaling thing too, right? Because unless you're playing the shorter 2-player game, you use the same amount of tiles, no matter the player count. And I've looked at some ending boards that were drastically different from mine in terms of how many enclosures to like scoring carnival attractions. Like that ratio may depend on the player count.
Yeah.
I guess I was expecting more. I was expecting more because of Uwe, because of Capstone, because of the gorgeous production, and I was sort of like, I personally don't believe the production is worth the game, and that's just a hot take.
And yeah, I could be convinced that at the price point, that is an argument worth making, absolutely.
Also, it's nothing like New York.
That's going to sum up our collective feelings on New York Zoo. I also wanted to very quickly chime in on my initial thoughts on a game that I had a lot of people in the Discord recommend to me or sort of say that I should try. There were times where Targi had come up on the podcast before and it seemed like a game that I would be very interested in, but it's kind of like left it hanging. And then until enough people in the Discord mentioned it as something I would enjoy that I felt it was worth picking up. So I've now played a couple of games of Targi, and very quickly, the way that this works is a 2-player exclusively worker placement game where you have a grid of cards with what are called border actions around the edge of the board, and you place 3 of your workers on those border action cards. You're going to get to do the action of all 3 of those workers, as well as collect the card where the workers intersect. So if you imagine you have a worker at the top of the board, another worker at the bottom of the board, and then your third worker on the right-hand side of the board, that's going to create 2 points where those workers intersect on cards in the middle. And it's always going to be 2 specific points. So alternately with your opponent, you place your workers, but then your opponent nor you are able to place in that same column. So what you're able to do is effectively eliminate rows and columns on the boards by placing a worker, as well as dictate what actions and what cards are going to be available to you. So there's this very cool back and forth. Okay, well, if you're going to deny me this, then I'm going to make sure I guarantee myself this. And by guaranteeing myself this, I've denied you everything else in that row. So there's this cool interplay between what do I know my opponent wants versus what do I necessarily want. And it's something that feels a lot more pronounced than in most worker placement games, precisely because it is a 2-player game and precisely because of this very specific duality between blocking and worker placement. What you're trying to do by collecting these cards in the middle is either acquire goods or acquire these tribes cards, which are used for your end of game scoring. Goods are used to pay for those cards as well as for other actions around the board. So it is without going too much into all of the mechanics in it, is a game about acquiring resources, trading them, spending them in order to acquire a tableau of scoring cards. But I thought this was quite novel, especially in the worker placement space, because of how competitive it felt. Like, I think there is just something you can do with 2-player games, which is, I'm going to focus so intently on what you're doing versus what, 3 or 4 other players at the table are. In a lot of the ways that we were talking about New York Zoo earlier, a lot of games, I think, in their most ideal, want players to be paying attention to other people's board states, and Targi absolutely demands that. Like, you can see on someone else's tableau exactly what tribe card they need to maximize their scoring, and do everything in your power in order to block them from getting that card. And that dynamic, I think, works really well. Also, the puzzle of trying to figure out which worker card on the border, which tribe card in the center, what combination of placements is going to get me the most for this round. It's a fun puzzle to solve every turn. I really dug Targi.
I think this, for me, falls very perfectly into that trap of the worker placement. You have to solve a puzzle, and then you get to place your worker, which is exactly what I dislike. I totally get why you dig it, and I think it's a very interesting and pretty unique design, which I think it has a lot going for it.
Yeah, I think if it was just purely like find the optimal solution to your puzzle and then execute on it, I would have the same reservation. But there's also this element of like best laid plans. Like, as soon as your opponent plays a marker that blocks off your optimal puzzle, you sort of have to pivot in a way that, okay, well, what's the next best thing I can do? I dug that for sure. But that is Targi.
Thank you, Neelan.
You're welcome.
What, Mark? I was
nothing. No, I love the holiday spirit flowing.
Oh, yeah. Very Merry Christmas, children. All right. I am very excited to talk about a small 2-player only Japanese card game that I am really jazzed about. Perhaps the most jazzed of all jazzed that I have been in 2020. This is called Throne and Grail. So this is not a new card game. It's just new to me. I don't know why I purchased it, but I've had it in the shelf of shame for at least 6 months. And I got it out, and I can say it's fantastic. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. It is meaner Colorado with a deeper push your luck system. Essentially, it is a 4-round game where you are playing cards and then taking up to 5 in a row. So I play a card, Nealon plays a card, I play a card, Nealon plays a card, Mark, you don't play a card because it's 2-player only. And then as soon as someone says I'm taking, they take 5 cards starting from the end of that row all the way back. They get all those cards, and then everyone keeps playing cards until the round ends. Then you get new cards, and then you keep playing, but you can only take once per round, which is awesome. That's the tension of the game. If you collect the 3 Grail cards, you win the game. That's the first rule. If anyone collects the 3 Grail cards, they win the game. Otherwise, you're collecting positive and negative points, a la Colorado, so just little bonuses. And you're also doing a small set collection game. There's a 5, a 6, a 7, and an 8. Whoever has the most 5s at the end of the game gets 5 points. Whoever has the most 6s, 7s, 8s. A set of those numbers is also worth 5 points. And honestly, that is the game. You are amassing points, but then if someone gets a Grail card, you're like, oh, I can't let them get more of those Grail cards, and so that derails your plans. You can take the pile before it gets to 5 cards, but if you take too early in the round, you're going to be opening yourself up. Maybe they have a hand with 2 Grail cards, and then you're just got. Very tight, very back and forth, very mind-gamey. What card does that player have left in their hand? I cannot say enough how good this is and how shocked I was the first time we played it. I think Christina and I played it 4 times in a row. This is a 10 to 15-minute game. It feels a little bit like some kind of old school card game, that has that addictive quality to it. Stunningly cute little art. Everything about it, I'm over the moon. I'm so happy to have Throne and Grail.
I'm really excited to try this out. I hadn't heard anything about it before you mentioned it recently, so yeah, that sounds great.
The first player marker card is split yin and yang, and this side says, "You are the first, move. Quick!" Exclamation mark. You flip that shit over, it says, "Just a moment, you are the second move." And I'm like, this is a good game. This is a 10 out of 10.
Honestly, if I just saw that card, I would think this is a game for Kellen, just by looking at that card alone.
Uh-huh.
It is shocking how much there is here. It feels a little like Hanami Koji. It feels a little bit like Colorado on steroids. Just so much going for it in such a simple package. I tried to find a way to play with Mark and Nealon, but, 2020 and COVID, I suspect they will both like it. It's that sort of game that you start a game night with. You're waiting for other people to show up. Someone on our Discord mentioned that's when they pull it out. But just a fantastic game. Throne and Grail. Probably not the last time you will hear me talk about this year.
That does look good. But have you seen there's a Polish version that's themed around chocolate?
I did. It looks like garbage.
It does.
If you have a choice, I choose Japan. But yeah, it does not look nearly as cute as Throne and Grail. I definitely imported this from a site that I think I had to use Google Translate for, but I'm sure there's a way to get it. This is the kind of game that makes me scheme. I'm like, we should just put the tanks on this, kickstart it, and we'll be geniuses. No one will ever notice. That is Throne and Grail. Okay, Mark.
Yeah.
Tell us about Red Cathedral.
I will, Kellen, but before I do, a quick mention about half a game I played of Imperial Struggle very recently. Imperial Struggle, for those who don't know, is the spiritual successor to Twilight Struggle, one of the classics of the board gaming hobby. It was the number 1 game on BGG for a long, long time. So Twilight Struggle is by the same designers, by the same publisher. It has Struggle in the title, and is a 2-player sort of war card-driven, mostly game. So there's a lot of shared DNA. I have not played a full game. I played about 4 hours of a learning game. And
what?
Yeah. And ended up wrapping up before the end. And that is one of the first things I want to talk about really quick about Imperial Struggle. It is much heavier, much more rules dense at the very least. Perhaps not heavier in the decision space sense of things, but it is a much more rules heavy game than Twilight Struggle. I would say Twilight Struggle is much more elegantly designed. It's hard for me to say what I think of Imperial Struggle in general, but it's a much different game. It's much less card driven. It's much more action point system, although there's action points in Twilight Struggle. But just the number one overwhelming thing is it's much more rules dense. I'm eager to play it to get a game through, but on first blush, my feeling is that it's just too rules dense to surpass Twilight Struggle, which I think is a really, really good game and just moves very smoothly. This one, I guess, might get there, but there's a lot of stuff to keep track of. There's also more luck than I sort of would expected, but maybe I'll touch base on this later when I get a full game played, but that's just my quick impression on Imperial Struggle. And now on to Red Cathedral. So Red Cathedral is, as the title alludes to, about the building of St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, the very famous cathedral in Red Square. What you're doing in this game is building it. The way you do that is there is a rondel, and this is sort of the basis of the game. This is a game that it was on my most anticipated list a couple weeks ago for this rondel system. The way it works is the rondel is split into 8 spaces, and there are communal dice that are in the spaces, and the spaces correspond to resources that are needed to build the cathedral. And the amount of spaces that you move along the rondel corresponds to the pip. So a die with a 6 pip on it, you would move 6 spaces, and then you are going to take an amount of resources equal to the number of dice in that space. So I move the blue dice has 6 pips on it. I move 6 spaces. I land in the wood spot, and there's another dice in there already. Now there are 2 dice there. I get 2 wood. Boom. That's how the resources work. Furthermore, there are 3 actions in the game. So the first one is to gather resources in the manner I've sort of described there. Another one is to stake your claim on one of the parts of the cathedral. The cathedral is made up of cards of varying heights, so there may be one part of the cathedral that's like 3 cards tall, another one may be 7 cards tall. So you can stake your claim to say, I'm going to build a part of the cathedral. When you do, there is a token on the part that you selected that you can elect to pay for to place on your own player board. And you can assign that token to any of the colored dice. So, for example, I may stake a claim on one of the cathedral spaces. That token on the space may show a little gold icon, which is one of the resources. If I assign that gold icon to, say, the green die, that means whenever I use the green die to get another resource, whenever I use the green die in the normal fashion, I will also get a gold resource. Some of the tokens, instead of being a resource, will have another die on it, another color die. So in this example, let's say the token I picked up had a red die on it. So if I assign that red die token to, say, my blue die space on my board, whenever I use the blue die, I get whatever resource that lands on, but I also get the resource of the red die wherever it is. So I get both the resource of the blue die where it lands and the resource of wherever the red die was to begin the turn. So that's an interesting engine building thing that really ramps up. You definitely are getting much more things at the end of the game than at the beginning of the game. So it's always a nice little feature when it comes to engine builders where you really feel like your engine is revving up. And then the last thing you can do on your turn, there's, again, resource building, staking claim to one of the parts of the cathedral. And the third thing you can do is actually building the cathedral. That's pretty much straightforward. Different parts of the cathedral require different resources. The thing that makes it interesting, though, is that there is an area majority aspect to the game at the end, and you score based on how many parts of the cathedral you built, as well as these extra things you can add to the cathedral, these little ornaments. It's sort of more than I can describe now, but the thing that's important to mention is that this building aspect, this actually building the parts of the cathedral, makes for a game where tempo is very important. So there is a lot of timing where I can use my build action now to finish up this part of the cathedral, but then I'm leaving it for the next player to, add one of these ornaments to the cathedral that's going to give them area control. There's a lot of am I going to finish something here now or try to wait another round? There's also another tempo consideration where if somebody above you in the cathedral, like in a higher space, builds before you are able to finish, you get a negative point, so that's a further tempo mechanic. I'll say that I was very excited about this game. And then when it came out, it felt like it sort of landed with a bit of a thud. Furthermore, when I saw that, the resources are like wood and stone and like the normal stuff, and it's like a recipe fulfillment thing.
What else would you build a cathedral out of, Mark?
That's true. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. But, I saw these generic resources and the box is very small, and I just thought, maybe there's not very much to this. I am happy to report that I was very pleasantly surprised by the game. The tempo thing, I'm a sucker for games where tempo is an important consideration, and it is with Red Cathedral. It also moves very, very fast, and that engine building aspect is very satisfying. It's really nice to go from like getting 2 bricks on my first turn of the game, and then at the end, I'm like, there's a lot of things firing off, and that's a very nice aspect to it. I just thought it was a really, really, really good design, and very excited to play it some more.
I'm actually super pleased to hear that, because I do remember when we were doing our SN review, when I was looking at the game, I think I had the exact same reaction that you did, of just like, oh, resources and contract fulfillment, and then I kind of glossed over the rest of it a little bit.
Right.
But I think it's got a very striking presence, at least from the photos I've seen of it. Like, it's got a beautiful board. It does have just a very cohesive feel to it in terms of its look. And I'm glad to hear that the mechanics live up in your estimation. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Can you punch each other in the game?
I mean, you can always sort of punch each other. I don't think that's game specific.
Is there a penalty in the rulebook for that?
No, not in the rulebook. I think there may be legal ramifications. If you're asking about player interaction, is that what you're trying to do here?
Maybe.
There is in sort of the ways I described, building something above somebody else gives them negative points, and also the tempo thing is just really nice. It's not like dripping with it, but like the little tempo considerations really elevate it in my estimation. And if like bang for the box is something that you're looking for, small footprint, this is fantastic. I mean, the box is quite small and there's a lot of game in there. I was really impressed by that.
I was imagining like an archipelago-like game where some people are building the cathedral and someone's trying to like tear it down without other
Right.
players noticing.
Right.
But you're saying that's not in the rulebook either?
No, but, you could house rule it
Perfect.
if you wanted to. And that is Red Cathedral by Israel Senadero and Sheila Santos, who I guess used to make games under the name of Llama Dice and by Devere Games.
If his lackadaisical delivery makes it hard for you to find, just know that this game is actually called The Red Cathedral. Very different from Red Cathedral.
And if you're looking for the school in Columbus, it's the Ohio State.
Wow, I walked into that. Before we get into our featured topic, just a shout out, we have another ongoing math trade. This one ends on the 9th of December, so update your wants and wishes. Maybe Santa will make them come true.
BoardGameBarrage.com/trade to find it, as you'd always find math trades from us. So whenever you want, BoardGameBarrage.com/trade.
Just a call for end-of-year reviews for the podcast. If you've enjoyed the podcast this year, please consider leaving us a review anywhere that you listen to podcasts, whether that's iTunes, whether that's Apple, whether that's on the Apple Podcast Store, whether those are 5 stars or 5 stars. Consider leaving a review. It's very kind. It makes us happy, specifically when you say which tank you like best. That is the red tank with the in front of it. But let's jump right into our featured topic. The featured topic today is something that we think you should be paying attention to in the world of board games. We each came up with a designer, a publisher, or something that we think that you could pay more attention to in the world of board games, and what that might get you. Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in with mine. This has become very recently relevant, and I think will become more relevant as we go into December and people start getting their Dune Imperium pre-orders. I felt, especially for the last couple of years, that Direwolf Digital, the oddly named publisher of the board game Dune Imperium, as well as such prior successes as Eternal Chronicles of the Throne and Clank in Space, Clank Legacy, I've kind of felt that this has been a very strong year for them, and also somewhat of like a watershed moment for them as a publisher. They've published previously a lot of digital games. In fact, as their name suggests, they have their origins in being primarily on the digital end of the board game scene with products like Eternal, the digital trading card game, and then digital ports of popular board games like Root, which I'm sure has been extremely successful for them, as well as Yellow and Yangtze, which ended up being the primary way that I played a lot of this game this year and led to a very big appreciation on my part for that design, as well as Tigris and Euphrates.
Are you forgetting, Neelan, their number one game that they published on the internet?
The number one game that they published on the internet?
Excuse me? Go to direwolfdigital.com right now, sir. Tell me what you're wrong about.
What am I wrong
Because
about?
I'll tell you right now, it's in the pole position.
I got somewhere else instead. That's not Direwolf Digital. Oh my god, no one cares about Pokemon the trading card game online.
No one cares? Do you see it in the pole position?
Yeah, well, they had to put something there that was going to appeal to you. Anyway, other than their excellent digital games, we're here to talk about board games. And the board games that they've released up until this year had been in collaboration with Renegade Games. So stuff like Clank, stuff like Eternal Chronicles of the Throne. And one of the common threads for them was that they have credited as their sole designer the creative director of Direwolf Digital, a guy by the name of Paul Dennen, who I've just been very interested in seeing what he does next. Because what he has done with Clank and Eternal Chronicles of the Throne and with Dune Imperium is sort of putting his own stamp on deck building as a genre. He's now created 3 different games that sort of hybridize with deck building in different ways, but feel completely different from each other. Clank is a very accessible, push your luck game with a dungeoneering theme. Eternal Chronicles of the Throne is primarily, as far as I'm concerned, a 1v1 dueler in the vein of, I'm sure they would want me to say Eternal here, but in the vein of something like Magic the Gathering, where you're summoning creatures and battling them against each other. But in the context of a deck builder, i.e. this is not a deck construction game where you need to acquire the cards ahead of time. You're assembling this deck as you go. And then now with Dune Imperium, this marks their transition into what seems to be them becoming more interested in self-publishing and a very beloved property that I think if this year had gone differently would have tied in with the release of a major motion picture. So this does feel like a big jumping off point for them as a publisher, and especially for Paul Dennen as a designer, and someone I think to keep an eye on. I at least am super excited to see what he continues to do, if he continues to do that in the deck building space or otherwise. Yeah, these have just been some of my favorite games since I've been in the hobby, and it's just, I'm very excited to see where they go next.
So is this the kind of idea, Neelan, where you will blindly just pre-order, whatever is next from this design group?
I think maybe. I think that they're definitely now in that realm of I will absolutely pay attention the next time that they announce anything. And I think that's a product of them delivering interesting, well-produced games that are mechanically solid, but have their own specific feel to them. They don't feel quite like other games, or at the very least they feel like very interesting spins on other sorts of games.
I think one of the interesting things is when people are first getting into board games, there's this sense that I'm looking for a pirate game. And, now when I see someone ask, I really like, Cyberpunk, what board game should I buy? I kind of still squint at the question now, but it kind of makes sense at the beginning. But you sort of start seeing these patterns of either designers or publishers, and you say, look, I know that what they're doing is interesting, and so I'm going to keep them close. So if someone wants to check out one of their games, you'd recommend Eternal first or Clank?
That is an interesting question. I think that Eternal Chronicles of the Throne would be the best answer to that, not only because it is a relatively cheap board game, you can have this for $20, but I think that especially if you have at least passing familiarity with deck building as a concept, or even if you don't, that would be a good introduction to deck building, or a good way to see, this is an interesting take on dueling deck builders in the Ascension Star Realms mold, but that feel pretty unique.
And do you play this online, Eternal?
Eternal, I don't believe, has a digital implementation. I feel like I got this wrong or didn't at some point in the past, but I think they have mentioned that they are making a digital version of Eternal Chronicles of the Throne, but it does not exist yet. So no, all my games of this have been in person.
I was going to say, where's my evitation?
I think that for me, it's specifically this combination of a strong publisher with a designer that I am very intrigued in. That always feels like a very interesting pair to me. For me, it was like Vlaada Chvátil and CGE traditionally. There was a strong pairing there.
Right.
And I always just loved those combos. When Eric Lang was at CMON, that also felt like just one of those strong, I trust that anything that Eric Lang was overseeing at that company would have good production values and a strong design. And this just feels like the next one that I'm latching onto personally.
All right. Thank you, Neelan, for your wisdom.
You're welcome. Anytime. I have much wisdom to give.
I would say Neelan is the wise one,
Yeah, I'll accept that.
I mean, maybe Mark's the old one, so maybe he should be wise. But I think wisdom perpetuates the more children you have.
That's true.
That's true.
That's like
That's a fact. That's real.
yeah, that's in the dictionary. I can't go on Wikipedia this month though because they're just begging for money. All right, something that you should pay attention in the world of board games. Here I am with my hot take. I think that you should pay attention to the new board game releases. So this is a concept, I think, that there is the pushback, there is the group that is only buying board games on Kickstarter, there is the group that says, no, you should only play tried and tested games from 5 years ago and only look at the top 100 on BGG. I've been asked a few times how I source new games, both for the podcast, but just where do I hear about them? And so this is both as a consumer, but also as someone who helps run a board gaming podcast. My homepage on only my personal computer, let me make that clear, only my personal computer, for many years has been the new release page on Cool Stuff Inc. In 2020, maybe it should be Game Nerds. I don't know. Still Cool Stuff Inc. right now. Every day, literally, if I don't have something to do on my free time, let me be clear, on my free time, I will refresh the new games page on Cool Stuff Inc. and look at games that are available for pre-order and for sale. A lot of times, the games will get added to Cool Stuff Inc. even without box art. And so it'll just be names. And I love the middle click. You know, I'm the king of the middle click. I'm open up 17 tabs. I'm like, the hell is Dragon Bridge? Is this based on Bridge? It kind of seems like it. What is an edible game cookbook? Who the hell knows? Oh, I think I've heard of that Cristello game. Oh, I think I've heard of the Few and Curse. I'm opening these tabs, and then I follow them to BGG, and I look for publishers I know. I look for designers I know. I look for anyone who's sort of talking about it, and then if I'm really interested in the game, I hit sort of the subscribe button on BGG, which allows you to see when any updates come for that game, whether that be a rule book I'll be looking for so I can check that out. I find that I get a lot of good information on here. You know, I found out about Twa Dice just because it goes to the distributors who then update these online websites even before the press releases come out sometimes. That is the first place that I look at new releases of board games. The second place that I see all the new releases of board games is a Board Game Geek blog called All the Meeples of the Rainbow. So if you're not familiar, this is Board Game Steph, board gamer Steph Hodge. I believe she works for Board Game Geek now. I don't know that that was always the case, but she has a podcast, and I swear to God, top 5 game players in the world. Like, I would put her game knowledge in the top 5. It has to be. If you go to this blog, I love reading her blog because she takes a ton of photographs of all of the new board games, and she loves color. And, you know, if you know me on the podcast here, I also love color. So I'm like just scrolling through pictures and seeing stuff that I really like. She does a new blog post, I swear, every 3 days. And there's like 12 new releases. I'm like, how is this possible that someone is getting shipped this many new games? And many new upcoming games I hear from just straight from her blog. It also helps that she doesn't particularly like confrontation in games. So a lot of times I will sort inversely. So if she says this game is too mean, I'm like, great, pre-order that shit. A fantastic resource if you want to look at new games. We'll put a link to her blog in the show notes so that you can check that out.
That sounds great. I followed her on Twitter, and I've seen her work with Board Game Geek on videos when they did like Essen videos and different convention videos, and she's always great in them, but I have not followed the blog, so that's a great recommendation.
Yeah, I traded with her at Gen Con a few times in the math trade like 2 years ago, and I was like so stoked, you know, and she's like, who the hell are you? And I'm like, oh my God, you know, like I'm so excited to talk to you. It was very fun and one of those funny experiences where you follow someone else. The last way that I keep up with new releases is using Geek Buddies. I'm super selective with this tool, but you can actually just follow people on Board Game Geek and see what they're doing. I don't recommend you do this with Mark Nealon or I, but you can. I have a select group of 3 or 4 friends that I've met throughout the years, including my friends from New York, where I just, if they're talking about a game, you know, I'm like, oh, this could be interesting, and I jump in and I look at it. We're like bugging a publisher right now to try to get this game on Kickstarter based on one play that Kurt had of it like 2 years ago. And I'm like, let's do it. Like, where is this game? I want it. The value in keeping up with new releases is, one, being a part of the zeitgeist. And you can get carried away. And I want to be very clear, like, I'm all about saving money. Save that money. Don't double charge me for it. All of that stuff. But I think that seeing where the trends are, seeing that we're in a season where everybody's making a deck builder plus, seeing that we're in a year where everyone is releasing another tile laying game with a stupid theme like cats. It's like everyone has these trends that are happening, and you want to pay attention to it so that you can figure out which is the best of that trend, and then you can buy it like a year later. What you don't want to be is like us, which is to say that we're the ones sifting through all of the games and then getting you to sort of the good ones. But I think that there's something interesting about following trends and seeing what these designers and publishers are releasing and where we're going. Right now, it feels like everyone is making a board game world with cool art and then going like, surprise, don't you want to play the RPG about it? You're like, no, I don't care about a title Blades RPG. Why would it? There's no story to root. God, I'm just pummeling people. Why do you want me to play this? It's like if I wanted lore, I'll read Lord of the Rings. Bug off, people. I am just rambling now. Mark, I am curious what you think. Do you think people should keep up with the new releases?
I think so, yeah. And I think the ways you've mentioned are good ones. Seeing what your geek buddies are playing is a good way to see, like, not only what's hot, but what's hot and maybe something that would jive with kind of games you want to play. But speaking of which, I noticed that, and I'm not sure when you're talking about your geek buddies, if you're referring to some secret personal account you have on BGG, or if you're talking about the Board Game Barrage account. I'm looking at the Board Game Barrage geek buddies, and let me see here. I've got Nealon as a geek buddy, and I've got Mark Bigney as a geek buddy. But where's the other Mark? Where's the Mark you're a co-host with? I see Quentin Smith. He's a geek buddy.
Uh-oh. You found me out. I've got 3 friends in this world.
Yeah, and 2 of them are Nealon and Mark Bigney. And one of them is not me.
And 3 of them won't return my phone calls.
Mark. Yeah, good.
Well, I was going to try to get you to move on, but if you have something else to say. I just, you are the one that is the least willing to just buy new releases.
Right, absolutely.
But I would be interested to hear, A, how you keep up with the new news, and B, like what value that brings you, besides running a board game podcast, because not many people do.
Sure. The way I find out about new games is mainly through watching videos, either released by BGG or by, the Dice Tower. They're prolific in terms of their output, and seeing games that are out.
I wish there was a way to have a Dice Tower feed that didn't have Mike DeLucio in it.
Right. We can only dream for something.
Is the Boolean filter for that available, Nealon?
We could try. I'm sure we can get something hooked up, like boardgamebarrage.com/Dice Tower, which is the better version of the feed.
Oh my God, if we could make that happen.
But yeah, just seeing people who as you sort of mentioned, people whose taste I think I sort of jive with, talk about new games is probably the biggest way that I sort of plug in. I mean, I'm less inclined to just make impulse purchases or feel the need to get new games or play new games, but I like to be, in the loop.
Yeah, this is like an avenue that I am scared to pursue too hard, because I would say maybe of the 3 of us, I have the least good impulse control when it comes to a lot of board games I see. But I think that the thing that scares me a little bit is like going too deep down that rabbit hole. So like I am forced to absorb a lot of this through the same as Mark, like through YouTube or like say board game Twitter. But I think if I were scouring every new release and following through on all of those threads, I would just have an absurd number of board games.
2 follow-up things. I agree. I think now that you mentioned my only geek buddies, I also, the So Very Wrong About Games podcast and the Shut Up and Sit Down podcast are 2 that I keep in my permanent rotation, and I'm writing down games that I might be interested in checking out. But as you develop friendships in the board gaming community, and I'm not one for community, but if there were a community, it is fun to sort of get reached out to. Like Delicio reached out to me and we were arguing about Dwellings of Everdell today. It's kind of like, could I like this? And so a lot of times you're pushing people to be like, no, this is a Mark game, this is a Nealon game. And so even outside the 3 of us, as we expand out into the community, you get people reaching out and saying, no, you need to check this out because of your tastes. So there is a little bit of the more you're participating in that zeitgeist, the more you may have people reach out with specific recos to you, either on our Discord or on Board Game Geek or wherever you are. That is all I got. Something that I think you should be paying attention to is the new releases of board games. Mark?
Yes.
What you got for us?
So for me, this is something that I have really become aware of just recently. It's something that I always knew, but the quality of the output of, well, both the Kramer and Kiesling duo, but specifically Kiesling, which I think, they've released some incredible games together. They have the Mask trilogy with Tikal, Mexico, Java. This year they have Paris, which I'll talk about probably on a future episode, and Renature, which is a game we played at the Camp Capstone event a couple months ago and really, really enjoyed. And I think that of the two, Kiesling is probably the lesser of the two. Kramer is the one who designed El Grande, Six Nimmt.
Cosmo.
What's that?
Nothing. I said Cosmo.
Oh, Cosmo. Colosseum. So he's made some incredible games on his own. But just recently, I played Riverboat, which is a game that was released not too long ago by Michael Kiesling. And I was blown away by how solid it is. And looking back at his production, he's got games that I played way after they were released, so there wasn't much hype to them. And I always come away from his games thinking like, you know what? There's not much glitz to this. We're not sitting down all excited to play it because, it's released like a long time ago and nobody's like super, super excited to play it. But after every one of his games, I feel like I walk away thinking like, that's a pretty darn good game. I had that feeling with Vikings, which is a game that was released something like 10 years ago, has a really interesting pricing economic system. Heaven and Ale is one of my favorite games probably of the last 3-4 years. Really, really tight economic game. Azul is obviously his crowning achievement, which is, one of the biggest games of the last 5 years. But as I was saying, Riverboat, I just played it. It has very little to do with riverboats and is really a sort of a farming game. But again, didn't go in with very high expectations. Played it mainly because I thought riverboats might be a cool theme and because Kiesling was the designer, thinking, well, it's going to be solid. And I just left it thinking like, that is a really, really good game. And so it just makes me want to go back and play some of the games of his, some of the older, lesser known games. I've heard a lot of really good things about Reworld, which is a game that sort of came and went a couple years ago, but people who've played it sort of swear by it from what I can tell. Porta Nigra is a game that I've heard really good things about. Cavum is a game that a lot of people consider a classic that I haven't played. Even Adventureland. Adventureland is a game I have played. A game that sort of came and went, has super generic art, super generic theme. And I remember playing it, not really expecting much, and thinking, like, that's a really, really good game. I'm even, at this point, interested in playing Bison Thunder on the Prairie, which has, like, the worst box cover in the history of mankind, but it's a Kramer and Kiesling game, and it can't be bad. I would put the duo up with the Knizias and with the Felds. I'm not as big a Feld fan as I am a Knizia or a Kramer and Kiesling, but, like, these guys know what they're doing, and like the output is always solid. So this is a shout out to K&K, but more specifically Kiesling. Just really, really solid stuff.
What about Gulo Gulo?
Gulo Gulo is a Kramer game, a Wolfgang Kramer game. I mean, these guys just make good games. Another one, perfect example, a game that like looks boring, didn't sit down, very excited to play it just because of the boring theme, and it's an older game. Coal Baron. I played it and I thought, this is a really good game. Like, this is a very solid game that I would definitely play again. They just make really good games.
And Six Nimmt and Linko are both classic card games for me, specifically.
Sure.
What does a Kramer game look like? What does a Kiesling game look like? And then what does a Kramer and Kiesling game look like? And don't abbreviate that into one KK.
Right. So it's hard. I think Wolfgang Kramer games, when you think of them, you think of El Grande, you think of like Princes of Florence, you think of Colosseum. They feel like classic designs stripped down. I think this is a Kramer and Kiesling thing where they feel like stripped down, rules light, but big in terms of like decision space. So it's hard for me to differentiate the two because they have so much overlap. What's the difference between Kramer's El Grande and Kiesling's Azul? They're obviously very, very different games, but the DNA there's a lot that ties them together. Small rules, but very streamlined, strong designs. So you get that from both of them, and you get that when they combine forces. It's hard because I don't know, like, for example, Riverboat. It's a game that has a lot of things that you've seen before, but it has a couple interesting twists, and just, like, the way that some of the known quantities have been mixed up is interesting. And then you just have rock solid design, where you feel like you almost learn the rules. And again, there's a small rule set, so there's not much to learn. And it almost immediately feels intuitive. Like you start playing and you're like, oh, obviously this goes with this and that goes with that. It's not like easy. I don't mean that to say like the game plays itself. It's just like as stark contrast to, for example, Imperial Struggle, the game I mentioned earlier, where we were consulting the rules like literally every 2 minutes. Kramer and Kiesling games, even things that have a little bit heavier rule set, like Cold Baron is a little heavier in the rule set, and games like Mexico, which is again another fantastic game. I haven't played all the Mask trilogy, but Mexico is great and very.
I have it in Shrink.
What's that?
I have it in Shrink.
It's so good. It's like aggressive in tempo. It's another great game. So yeah, I mean that's the thing. Palaces of Carrera, another very stripped down, super solid Euro. I know that because of how prolific they are, you kind of get the Knizia thing where so many games are out there that not all of them can be winners, and surely a lot of them are probably duds, but they just make so many good games. I don't think you can go wrong by trying out one of the top 50 ranked Kramer and Kiesling games. You're going to get a solid design.
Something I'd be curious to get your opinion on, Mark, is one of the things that always fascinates me with these designers that have these very long and diverse and prolific designs. I mean, they, going back like decades. One of the things I think that's interesting about design like Knizia, for example, is how you see his newer games or like evolutions of his past games. Like, do you feel that with the more recent Kramer Kiesling games you've played that there is a sense of like a progression as to where they're headed? Are you excited about like how their games have changed in any sense and are changing?
Right. It's interesting. I think Kramer and Kiesling, at least for me, and I'm not going to call myself an aficionado of their backlog, the way that I feel a little bit more, at least in terms of Knizia's like major games. You play Tigris and Euphrates and you play Yellow and Yangtze, and the title gives it away also, but there is a through line. There's like a clear this to that. I don't know if I know their library well enough to see that or to know if that was something that was there. But just for me, it's less about clever twists. Knizia has these clever twists to his games that are refined. For me, there are clever ideas to Kramer and Kiesling games, like, for example, Colosseum has that idea where your one best performance that you put on, no matter what round it comes in, is your score. That's like one of those things where you want a high water mark, and it doesn't matter if later in the game you do worse. That's an interesting scoring mechanism, an interesting facet. They have like these interesting twists, but it's more about just solid design. I don't think I see an evolution. I don't know if I would see it, but it's just like constant good titles. Like Renature, as far as I know, they don't really have a game. Renature is a game that's based on domino placement and stuff like that, and they certainly have area control, which you see in Renature in their other games. El Grande is the quintessential area control game. So they're definitely using aspects to games today that they use in past, but I don't know if I see the refinement that you are seeing of Knizia nowadays.
No, yeah, that's interesting, because it does. I mean, I think Renature is like a good example of maybe what the sort of thing you're alluding to, which is it just feels like a novel standalone design that could have existed 20 years ago. It doesn't feel like necessarily a reflection of the industry. It's just like, oh man, this game is just clean and good and just feels wholly formed.
Yeah, and then so you consider even contrast with their other 2020 big game, which is Paris, which is I played, and it doesn't feel like Renature at all. It feels like a much more standard Euro, but it has interesting mechanisms. It's got like the thing that I love in Francis Drake, the one-way travel thing, where there's a bonus track and you can pick up the best bonuses are at the end of the track, and it's a really long track full of bonuses, and you can go as far as you want. You can grab that great bonus right away, but then you're foregoing all these other bonuses. So it's like things you've seen before, but just put together really well, and they all flow super smoothly. There's no stuttering. There's no, wait, what do we do here? What does this mean? They're just designed super great.
That's cool.
As long as we can stop talking about the Luciani brothers or whatever they are, I'm all on board the Kramer and Kiesling bandwagon.
Who are the Luciani brothers?
The Italians?
Oh, the Italian group.
You didn't get the reference?
Yeah.
There's nothing to get.
Yeah.
I actually, honestly, whenever a designer there's more than one designer, I tune out. I'm like, what? I don't get it.
Yeah.
as I don't get most things. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. You can find us on all forms of social media. You can join our Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. If you have something that you think we should be paying attention to in the world of board games, please join and tell us. If you have a hot take on Kramer and Kiesling, if you know more about Direwolf Digital and their beautiful Pokemon trading card game online, join the Discord and tell us about it. You can email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. Nope, never. 'Cause we're adults. Thank you as always to Heart Society Music for their song What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album Wake the Queens. Thank you and good night.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. I would say maybe of the three of us, I have the least good impulse control when it comes to a lot of board games I see.
And women.
True. No, we're not keeping that.
That's canon, Neil. What do you mean?
Okay,
that's canon?
fine. Yes, as my many children will attest.